This morning we're reading from the 25th chapter of Leviticus. The 25th chapter of Leviticus, commencing to read from verse 1. The first section is called the Sabbath Year. The Lord said to Moses at Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I'm going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year, the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, your male and female servants, and the hired workers, and temporary residents who live among you, as well as for your livestock and the wild animals in your land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten." The year of Jubilee. Count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7 Sabbath years amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement. Sound the trumpet throughout your land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you is to return to your family's property and to your own clan. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow and do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest the untended vines. For it is a jubilee, is to be holy for you. Eat only what is taken directly from the fields. In this year of Jubilee, everyone is to return to their own property. If you sell your land to any of your own people, or buy land from them, do not take advantage of each other. You are to buy from your own people on the basis of the number of years since the Jubilee. And they are to sell to you on the basis of the number of years left for harvesting crops. When the years are many, you are to increase the price. And when the years are few, you are to decrease the price. Because what is really being sold to you is the number of crops. Do not take advantage of each other, but fear your God. I am the Lord your God. Follow my decrees and be careful to obey any laws, and you will live safely in the land. Then the land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and live there in safety. You may ask, what will we eat in the 7th year if we do not plant or harvest our crops? I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year that the land will yield enough for 3 years. While you plant during the 8th year, you will eat from the old crop and will continue to eat from it until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. May the Lord bless to us the reading from his word.
Good morning to you. Morning. Just to say a thing about masks. Sorry that we're still having to wear them, but whilst other people are saying you don't need to wear them, we've looked at the local situation here, and there is an awful lot of cases of COVID, so we think it's probably wisest to keep our masks on at the moment. Okay, there is a heck of a lot in Leviticus 25, more than I can cover in the few minutes that I've got this morning. So what I'm going to be doing this morning is just giving you a quick overview of some of the stuff there. But I hope that by reading through that chapter, and as David read it to us this morning, that there will be things that will sort of come to mind. You know, we'll be thinking, oh yeah, there's stuff there that we could discuss. And please read, you know, those first 22 verses, because there is a lot contained within that particular section. So let's have a look at Leviticus 25. And you remember last week I was talking to you about God's rhythms of life. And what we see here is this continuing theme of the rhythms in life. So just looking back to what we were thinking about last week, in chapter 23 we have the rhythms of 7 days. And then here we have the rhythm of 7 years, and then the rhythm of 7 times 7 years. And just to remind ourselves that the number 7 is a number of completeness in the Bible. So going back to what we were looking at last week, it says in Leviticus 23 and verse 3, there are 6 days when you may work, but the 7th day is a day of Sabbath rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work wherever you live. It is a Sabbath to the Lord. Now, I guess if I were to go around the congregation this morning and say to you, how do you interpret that? You know, when you read that, what does it make you think of? And I know, because of some of the conversations I've had with people, that there would be a spectrum of ways of interpreting that particular verse in the Bible. And at one end of that spectrum, we would have people who say, well, you must observe it in a very strict and literal way. It should really be a day of rest. And for some of you, you will remember parents and your own childhood of where you did nothing on Sunday. You know, heaven forbid if you went to the cinema or went to the theatre or even went in a shop or anything like that. And you know, so we have that end of the spectrum. And then the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are saying, well, every day is the Lord's day. And so it doesn't matter what you do on a Sunday, because every day is a special day to the Lord. And what we need to, it's one of those things where we need to understand different people will come from different viewpoints, and we need to exercise understanding and grace there, because not everyone will agree with our own point of view. So let's have a look at these other 2 rhythms of 7s that we've got here. And we need to remember that this was being given to the people of Israel. They were still in the wilderness at this point. They were a nomadic people. And what it was God was preparing them to be a settled people in the promised land. They would probably, at this time, not be used to the rhythm of planting crops and things like that. And this was preparing them ready for when they went into the promised land. And God's instructing them how they are to look after the land. So he tells them that they are to, for 6 years, they're to farm the land, they're to plough it, they're to sow seeds, to harvest it. And that what he's saying there is that just like people need a rest, so the land needs a rest as well. It needs a regular rest. So on the 7th year, you're to let it have a rest. You're not to plant any crops. You're not, what we would say nowadays is you're to leave it as fallow land. That's it. And there's a little bit of ambiguity. I don't know if you picked that up when David was reading it, but you read the text there carefully, and there's a bit of ambiguity, because it seems to say, but you can gather anything that happens to grow there by itself. But then it says somewhere else in the same passage, don't gather anything. And the way that people understand that is that actually it was addressed to the poor people, those people who hadn't got much. They could go and gather from the land. So there's a bit there. And the other rhythm that we see in this passage is the rhythm of Jubilee after 49 years. So 7 times 7, that number of completeness again. And following those 49 years, there was to be an extra year of rest, the 50th year of rest. And it was also a year of restoration as well. So not only rest, but restoration. Because people who had been sold into slavery or had to sell themselves into slavery, they were released from that. And they could go back to their own land. And if you have been sold some land during that time, then it was a leasehold agreement rather than a freehold agreement. In other words, you only bought the lease until the next year of Jubilee. If you trace the word Jubilee back, right back to its root meaning, it's interesting because what you find, it's an old Hebrew word, and I'll try to pronounce it. I don't know Hebrew, so I don't know quite how to pronounce it, but it's something like Yophel. Okay, it's spelled Y-O-B-H-E-L. But what it means is that it's a ram's horn that is used to sound, to blow a note. And if you look in verse 9 of the passage today, you will see that it talks about blowing the trumpet there. And today we use the word Jubilee, so if you achieve 25 years of doing something, we say, well, that's a year of Jubilee. Silver Jubilee is 25 years, Golden Jubilee is 50 years, and Diamond Jubilee is 60 years. And today, isn't it funny? I was commenting before the service that when I put the plan together for what we were preaching, I hadn't made the connection that today is the Platinum Jubilee of the Queen's accession to the throne. And so for the last 70 years, our Queen has been on the throne, and today was the day that her father died and she became the Queen. There's also this idea that we have what we call a sabbatical year, and many of us have heard of that phrase, and Helen and I were meant to have one a couple of years ago, but COVID came in. Maybe we should have had it and trusted God, I don't know. I was quite challenged when I was just thinking about that. But in talking about Sabbaths, what it is doing is Leviticus 25 is getting us to look back and to look forward, to look back to the past and to look back, to look forward to the future. And Sabbath rest speaks to us right from Genesis 1 and 2. So we read in Genesis 1 and 2 about how God created the whole world, and then he rested on the 7th day. So that is right at the start of the Bible. God is setting in place a pattern, a rhythm of life. 6 days you shall labour, and on the 7th day you'll have a regular rest and that. And that's reinforced for us from what we read in Leviticus 23 as well. But then Leviticus 25 expands that, and it says not only do people need rest, but also the land needs rest as well. But then the writer of Hebrews, he takes it even further, because then what he is saying is that not only are we talking about a physical rest, but we're talking about some sort of other kind of rest as well. Because if you read in Hebrews chapter 4 and 9 to 11, it talks about there being another sort of rest. And we can understand this in two different ways. That when a person comes to faith in Jesus, they enter a Sabbath rest. Now let's just unpack that and understand what that means for a moment. Because what it means is that when you and I became followers of Jesus, we could stop trying to make ourselves good enough for God. We could rest from, oh God, if only I can do this, if only I can do that, I'll be good enough for you. And God says, no, come into my rest and accept the grace of Jesus Christ. Accept the love of Jesus Christ. Accept what Jesus has done for you on the cross and enter into my rest. And later on this morning, when we take communion, we will not only be celebrating Pentecost, remember we were saying about that last week, but we also will be celebrating this idea of Sabbath rest, that you and I are now resting in Jesus Christ because of what he has done for us on the cross. But then the writer of Hebrews doesn't stop there, because he then sort of hints at something else as well. He says there's another type of rest that you can come to, another type of Sabbath rest that you can enter into. Because that is the Sabbath rest that you and I will enter into when we finally finish labouring here on this earth. When we finish our time on this earth and we go to be with God in glory. Listen to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians. Listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will be changed in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. Hang on, what does the word jubilee mean? It comes from that word which means blowing a ram's horn, the sound of a trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised, imperishable, and we will be changed. For the perishable must clothe itself with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality. When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm, let nothing move you, and always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labour in the Lord is not in vain. In other words, what we're doing now in the 6 days, we will be rewarded on the 7th day when we go to be with God in heaven. Just like in the year of Jubilee, the ram's horn was sounded on the Day of Atonement. Remember the atonement, atoning at one moment, bringing us together with God. And remember what it said there in the passage that David read to us. It said about proclaiming liberty. What does liberty mean? It means being set free. And there'll be a day when you and I will be set free from this earthly life. When we shall be restored to paradise. No longer banished from Eden. So when the final trumpet is sounded, those who have laboured for the Lord will finally enter the Sabbath rest. We shall return home. There'll be a sort of restoration for each one of us to where we belong, the new heaven, new earth. So what does this passage say to us? Well, I think that there's, I've pulled out 4 things. There's a lot more in here as well. All right, but I've just pulled out four things. All things belong to God. I think it teaches about faith, it teaches about obedience, and it teaches us about the environment as well. And I want to just very, very briefly, I've not got time this morning to go into things in any great depth on that. But first of all, it reminds us that everything belongs to God. Right at the start of this chapter, it says that we're told that God was giving them the land. They were not taking it as because they were such a big, strong army. They were not taking it because it was their right to take it. They were taking it, going into the land, because God was giving it to them. And Psalm 24, verses 1 and 2 says, "The earth is the Lord and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters." And so what this passage is reminding us right at the start is that this is God's creation. And we are called to be stewards of his creation. The earth is not ours to do with as we like. And as stewards, as followers of Jesus Christ, we follow the Creator's instructions for his will. Secondly, it speaks to us about faith, putting faith into action. Because it talks to us about how the seventh year they had to trust God. And right at the end of the passage that David read to us, it was about understanding that God would provide for them. I don't know if you've sat and thought about what that actually meant for them. You get to the end of year 6 and you don't do anything for a year. You have a year off. Can you imagine the farmers around here saying, well, I'm not going to do anything next year because God tells me I've got to have a year off? Or can you imagine in your workplace saying, well, we're not going to work next year, we're going to have a year off, we're going to trust that God will provide for us? Because that's what it was saying to the people. It was about exercising faith for God to provide for them, to see them through from the 6th year to the 8th year. And it happened every 7 years. So in most people's lifetimes, it would perhaps have happened at least 8, 9, 10 times during their life, right from when they were children all the way up to when they were old age pensioners. And it's about, it comes back to that phrase that we read again and again and again in Leviticus, where it says, "Be holy because I am holy." In other words, trust the Lord, and be like God in your living. Put faith in God. Trust that he is going to provide. And it also has the effect of strengthening. When the more you trust God, the stronger your faith gets. It's if you think about who are the people that have got the strongest faith, well, they're the ones that put their trust in God the most. One of the great joys for me doing the Alpha course, I love watching the videos, is seeing the testimonies of the people who have put their trust in God and trusted that, taken God literally and put their faith in him. Someone once said that where you spell faith is R-I-S-K. It's risky business. Thirdly, it's about obedience. Well, obviously this goes alongside the faith thing as well. But are we willing to let God come in and direct how we live our lives? Because that's what he was asking his people to do. And if you're in a position at the moment where you're thinking, actually what I need is some sort of rest, some sort of Sabbath rest in my life. If you go before the Lord and say, God, I really do need, because things are messed up at the moment, and I'm struggling a bit with life, and I need to be strengthened. I need to be revived. I need to be rejuvenated. I need to be reinvigorated. I need to be just to spend time in your presence. Like it says in Psalm 23, Lord, I want to be, to make space so that I can lie down in green pastures. Think about lying in a green pasture. Probably not the best time of year for doing it at the moment. But what do you do when you lie in a green pasture? I'll demonstrate. Sorry if you can't see me. Thank you for the sound effects. But you lay there and you do nothing. You rest in God's presence. It talks in Psalm 23 about being led beside quiet waters. Now, we pray for that, are we willing to trust God that he's going to actually lead us into those places where we can lie down, where we can rest in him? Are we willing to put into practice what he says? As I said a moment ago, this was a huge thing for the people. That every 7 years, they, at the end of year 6, it's Sabbath year next year. We don't need to go and plough the ground. Well, that usually takes a few weeks to plough the ground. What are we going to do then? We don't need to go and sow the seed. What are we going to do with then instead of sowing the seed? We don't need to go and weed in between the plants and make sure they have enough water and later on crop the harvest. What are we going to do then? And something you might like to think about, I haven't got an answer for this, I confess, I don't know. But something you might like to think about is, what did they do on the 7th year instead of farming? Maybe one of the answers we could give is that they reflected on the need to be obedient to God. And then finally, sustainability. We hear a lot in the news, don't we, about sustainability. It's one of those current buzzwords that is around at the moment. But I think that God knew all about sustainability long before the 20th century. And he said to the people back in Genesis 1:28, he said, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds of the air, the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And then in 2:15 he says, the Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And that's the crucial bit, to work it and take care of it. And what we see in Leviticus 25 is the practical, how you take care of it. And we're still called, I think, personally, to take care of God's world. As the people of God, as people who say we follow the Lord Jesus Christ, we need to be setting the agenda almost, because God's given us insight into that. And one of the key things about that is not being greedy, because the people there were called not to be greedy, to give the land its Sabbath rest, to let the poor people go and gather in the crops and things like that. And not just to think of themselves, what can we get from it? We need to feed our family. We need to feed our family. And so they take and take and take, but with no reference to what their grandchildren are going to do, and their great-grandchildren, and so on. And it's a huge challenge for each one of us. And we could spend a long time, there's a whole sermon in here, but I've just touched on it. But we need to care for what we do have. And I think there is a bit of where we can, not just this church, but the church across the world needs to be taking a bit of a lead in this, in caring for the environment. So I want to just finish by giving you some questions to think about. So what does this passage teach us? I think it teaches us that we need to put God first. Secondly, that we need to trust that God will provide. And thirdly, I think it's a challenge for us to care for his creation. And there is, I think, some questions for you to think about this week in your discipleship groups. And remember what I said at the beginning, not everyone will agree with you. Different people will do it. But just start off by describing your Sundays. I wonder what, how your Sundays are. Is Sunday the Sabbath day? Need you to think about that. How do you personally have a regular weekly Sabbath rest? Does it work? Does it need reviewing? How can a church family help people to have a Sabbath rest? Because we're family together. It's not just about, oh, it's all right, so-and-so can do it, but we're in this together. And then how can we personally help to take care of God's creation that goes beyond local and national government initiatives? And finally, the last one, how will you put into practice the things you have discussed in your group? Some interesting things for you to do. Let me know how you get on. I'd love to hear. Thank you very much for listening.